Okay. Well, again, good day, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Impact of Data Discovery and Classification in Information Security. We've got a pretty exciting one for you today. So presenting with us is Dr. Larry Ponemon. He is the chairman and founder of the Ponemon Institute. It's a research think tank that's dedicated to advancing privacy and data protection and information security. And along with Larry, we have Dr. Joe Weber, Spirion CEO. Having previously served as CEO for multiple organizations, Dr. Weber brings over 2 decades of leadership in the technology space. So I'm really excited to have everyone with us here today. Dr. Weber.
Well, thank you, Gabe. We've been in the business of helping companies discover, classify, and remediate sensitive data for the last decade. Now, back 10 to 15 years ago, this space was expensive. And if you remember back, we always had to be careful about deleting data to make sure we had enough space for the new data. Well, that has all changed. You know, in the last 10 years, disk and server space is now plentiful. And this has led to a situation where people are not really focused on data cleanup after use. And we now have a situation where most organizations are dealing with massive data sprawl. Now, we always ask our customers at the outset of a project, how much unprotected sensitive data do you believe you have on your network? And this is a typical response. Most people think they have as many as 100,000 unprotected sensitive data elements. And while that is a large number, the actual number that they find after the first scan with us is more in the order of 25 million, which is just staggering for most people. Virtually all our customers are surprised by this. The problem is much bigger than people think. So this is what we do. We help companies accurately discover, classify, and remediate sensitive data, thereby eliminating sensitive data sprawl and bringing the organization under control. As you might expect, this approach is applicable to multiple business verticals, and we have customers from all major verticals using our Spirion platform daily to scan and protect their network and cloud infrastructures. At this point, I'd like to turn over to Dr. Larry Ponemon.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, and it's a pleasure to co-present with you and Gabe. What I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to talk about some of our key findings of a new study, a really interesting study. Of course, I'm somewhat biased. I think it's great. But the title of that study is called The Impact of Data Discovery and Data Classification in Information Security. This particular study involved IT and IT security practitioners, professionals, and leadership. In total, our sampling frame was over 3,500 strong. These are of DLP and non-DLP users, and their qualified final sample is 503 individuals. So if you're one of those individuals that spend the time completing the survey, God bless you. We can't do what we do without your support and consideration. Okay, with that being said, let's move on to our next slide. So for those people who aren't familiar with the Ponemon Institute, we are a very boring company because we are linearly focused on just 3 things: information or cybersecurity, data protection, and privacy. We've been in existence now for almost 16 years, over 15 years in total, and we've worked with a number of very large business organizations as well as governments. I say governments, the United States, of course, and other governments around the world. We do independent research, and we also educate leaders in the private and public sectors. And we are members of an association called Castro that changed the name recently to the Insight Association, but this is the leading association for survey research as well as analytics. A little bit about our study, and if you're interested in getting into the gruesome details, if you're a researcher, for example, I normally like to do that myself, so we're going to be able to send you a copy of the full report, and you can actually study that. And if you have any questions or concerns about this particular study or any study, give us a holler. We're located in northern Michigan, and we're very lonely up here in the Great White North. So if you have any questions or concerns, we love getting calls from people reading our studies. Okay, there are 3 distinct groups that we studied in this organization, and we actually do a 3-way comparison, which is pretty cool. We have those respondents that use data discovery and classification, so they're basically using Spirion. We have those folks that are not using Spirion, but they're using another commercial grade DLP solution. And then we have those folks that fall into the other category, which are manual or ad hoc users of DLP. And it's hard to imagine what an ad hoc user is if you have 25 million data elements, as Joe presented before. I think that'd be a little challenging. Our study was actually organized into 4 key sections. Number 1, we wanted to understand the overall security posture of those participating in our company. We wanted to understand their ability to locate sensitive and confidential data. We wanted to understand their current DLP capabilities. And also we wanted to understand at least a high level, what's the economic impact of data loss or theft in this environment. So we really try to do a lot in the study, and we think the results are pretty cool. Let's go to our next slide. Okay, drum roll. We actually have some data points to share with you. So first, let's look at the left side of the screen, the bar chart. And here is a question: how or has your organization experienced one or more data breaches over the last, I think it was 12 months was the exact wording in the study. And what we basically see is that the yes response is very high. Not surprising, because it's internally consistent with other studies, not just Ponemon Institute, but studies conducted by other learned research organizations. You'll also notice that at the end, there's a little bit of an interesting finding here that I need to point out. The gray bar, the middle bar, is lower than the 2 sides. And what's that middle bar? That's the non-DLP user group. And so what we basically see is that that group is most likely to be unsure, and which makes sense. If they don't have tools, they don't have DLP tools, it becomes really hard to know with any certainty whether or not you are aware of all of the potential data leakage or data loss or data theft that exists in your organization. So notice that on the unsure is very high at 25%. We also had another question on the, this is on the right side, the box, the matrix. How many cyber attacks has your organization experienced over the past 12 months? And this is for those organizations that said they had a data breach. And if you kind of go through the numbers, a lot of numbers here, focus on the cannot determine. Once again, we get that finding that those at the who are in the non-DLP user category are basically the least, most likely to say that they cannot determine, or in other words, they are not able to know whether or not they even had a data breach. They just know, gut feel, that they've had 1 or 2 or 7 or 10, but they don't actually know, and as a result, that could be a huge problem for the organization. Problems, things like, you know, reputation damage, regulatory violations, and other assorted costs that could be very, very significant for companies. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you. So data classification is broadly defined as the process of organizing data by relevant categories so that it may be used and protected more efficiently. The classification process not only makes data easier to locate and retrieve, but data classification is of particular importance when it comes to risk management, compliance, and data security. Now, within our customers, we typically see companies set up around 4 to 6 categories for classified data. The screenshot that you're seeing is actually taken from our Spyglass product. It shows the number of documents found by each category of classified data, and this will be at a certain day or for a certain period of time. On the left, it shows the actions taken. The documents may be redacted or have access restricted, they may be quarantined. Once Spirion is set up, it can automatically detect new sensitive data as it is being created, and then it automatically classifies it for you. Based on workflow rules for that category of classified data, Spirion can then automatically take these remediation actions. And as I said, that left-hand widget is showing how this body of sensitive data has been protected. This is Spyglass. This really is a technology, a very useful technology for most of our customers to be able to really get a look at their sensitive data footprint. If you look at the very top bar, that is the sensitive data footprint over time. Now, we all know that when we find out that we've been breached, we typically don't find out on the day it happens. I think the average is almost a year from when a breach occurs to when people find out about it. What this system allows you to do is to go back in time. So you can go back to the point of where a breach occurred and drill down and see what sensitive data you had and where it was located at the point of the breach. This is particularly useful. We did have one customer who received a ransomware demand, and when they went back to look at what sensitive data was on the endpoint that had been breached, they realized that there was nothing of consequence. So they declined to pay the ransom. So having this visibility into your sensitive data at any date in time, any week or any day, even down to the hour, is extremely powerful tool. And now back to Dr. Ponemon.
And by the way, Joe, I love that console. I used to have an airplane and had all the different dials and gauges. It kind of looked very similar.
That's where we got
really cool. I love it.
Thank you, Larry.
Oh, really? Thank you. Okay, so what best describes your organization's sensitive data loss prevention capabilities? And there are really 4 choices to the question. The one that I think we're going to talk about is the none of the above. That's not a good response. But the 4 choices are accurately locate sensitive data throughout the enterprise, which I consider nirvana. That's a really important thing to do. Set automated policies or decision rules to classify, to protect, and to monitor sensitive data. And then thirdly, control sensitive data management activities throughout one integrated console. And then none of the above. And you'll basically note that the blue bar, which pertains to Spirion users, is much more significant than the other 2 groups, DLP users and non-DLP users. And non-DLP users tend to have a higher number than that. The DLP users have a higher number than the non-DLP users. So I think there's a very important set of facts here or findings. But Gabe, I know you have some color commentary to add to this. I appreciate hearing it.
I do, absolutely. So those questions really represent a progression in the maturity of a data protection program, right? You start with the foundational activity of just being able to locate all of that sensitive data, and then as you kind of mature, regardless of how long that may take, some can do this in months, others it may take certainly quite longer. You need to be able to automate those data handling policies that you already have defined at a corporate level, and then ultimately controlling all that sensitivity through one console gives you the ability to manage that overall process. So what this particular set of findings and these questions really represent is again that maturity level that we see throughout the different types of uses of commercial and non-commercial solutions.
So where do we start? You know, it can be daunting when you look at an organization that's been in business for a decade or longer and has a massive amount of sensitive data. So what we did was we looked at some of our customers and asked them where they started, and we just wanted to share some of that information with you. So in this example here, one of our customers is a very large retailer. They have operations in over 60 countries. Phase 1, they focus just on PCI compliance. As you look at the screen there, you can see the area, and I'm normally pointing at this, so it's a little tricky just to describe it without being able to point at it. The area of the green, the top bar, shows you that is the sensitive data that has been discovered over time. And typically the amount of sensitive data that your organization has is going to increase over time as you go through business, you know, acquiring more PCIs, more credit card information, more social security numbers, and so on. The red area below is the amount of unprotected sensitive data. So you can see when they first started using Spirion, they had quite a lot of sensitive data that was unprotected. And then over time, as they put in policies, they were able to classify and remediate sensitive data, and they now have a very small amount of sensitive data on a daily basis that is unprotected. For phase 2, they switched to social security numbers. So after becoming PCI compliant and solving that issue, they started to search for social security numbers, employee social security numbers across these operations in 60 countries. And they're just starting to get into phase 3 now, and this phase is in response to the recent changes in European regulations with the GDPR regulations coming in. A little difficult to see on this screen, but in the classification section, which is the third from the left at the bottom, there's a GDPR, right to be forgotten piece there. And one of the functions our system does is one of the rules in GDPR is the ability to have right to erasure or right to be forgotten. And our system can help companies track whether people have requested to be forgotten and whether they have been find all instances of that person throughout your system and being able to make sure that you can comply with the right to erasure ruling. Back over to you, Larry.
Thanks, Joe. And boy, that right to be forgotten is a monstrous requirement. So I think you're going to actually see huge demand because I'm not unaware of any solution that basically does what your solution is capable of doing, which is really, really important. That's another story, by the way, but the right to be forgotten or the new European privacy laws are really, really tough. Okay. Well, here we're looking at the question, how would you rate your organization's ability to locate all sensitive or confidential data at rest? And this particular question, we use a 10-point effectiveness scale, 1 being ineffective to 10 being very effective. And the percentages that you see is basically called a high response. So when you use a 10-point scale, it would be the 7, 8, 9, or 10, those choices, 7, 8, 9, or 10 combined as a percentage. And again, you get this overwhelming result. So basically the tall bar at 89% is the Spirion users group, or sample. The non-DLP user group is only 17%. And the DLP user group, which is much higher than the non-DLP user group, but it's still only 39%. So basically, in terms of reported results, the Spirion results are just so much more significant, which again is another, I think, important fact. In fact, at this point, it might be, Gabe, if you had color commentary, I'd love to hear it.
I do indeed. I found this to be, again, pretty interesting with regards to the foundational nature of this activity in particular. And it was a pretty good validation of things that we knew, which was part of the reason why we endeavored on this research project in the first place. Somewhat unsurprisingly, those with manual and ad hoc capabilities were not capable of being able to, at an absolute minimum, locate that sensitive information in their environment. A bit more disappointingly, at least for them, those with similar commercial solutions were certainly underperforming this activity. Again, validating a lot of what we knew, but unfortunately still leading to a lot of the same scenarios that we encounter, which tends to be a fair amount of underprotected data.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that comment.
So another customer of ours, in this case, this was a $6 billion credit union with goals to become a $10 billion credit union. At the $10 billion mark, I mean, there's some pretty strong regulation, $6 billion, but there's further regulations that come into play when you reach that $10 billion mark. This company purchased Spirion last year. They're a 7-year McAfee user, and their goal is to become PCI compliant by October of 2017. When they started using our technology in conjunction with McAfee's DLP solution, the quote was, "We found data in all the wrong places." So in this particular example, they're using the Spirion Sensitive Data Platform to help inventorize and classify the entirety of their organizational data and give them full visibility and access to appropriate protection or actions. The technology integrates into the DLP system, in this case the McAfee DLP system, and makes the DLP more effective by prior to being used by the DLP, discovering and classifying all of the data appropriately.
Okay, well, we have another question here that I think is interesting. Now, we're not looking at the ability to locate as we did in our prior 10-point scale question. Well, I'm sorry, we're back to the slide that says attaining PCI.
There we go.
Okay.
There we go.
Someone has a big finger. It's okay. So instead of looking at locate sensitive or confidential information, now we're looking at how effective is your company's overall DLP solution. And we get that incredible result again for the Spirion. It's 89%, which is exactly the same number that we had in the other scale. Although different, the number here for non-DLP is 20%, and DLP users is a little higher than what we reported before at 47%. So again, what we're looking at is a 10-point scale. We're looking at the high response, those that gave a 7, 8, 9, or 10 response. And it's pretty clear that the Spirion users are much more enthusiastic about their company's DLP solution. So this is another, I think, really good fact. And Gabe, once again, if you have any color commentary here, that would be great.
I don't have a lot to add to this one, Larry. I think it further builds on the information that we saw previously. It's slightly subjective, so really what I wanted to do was kind of hold this one up and start tying it back to some of the data points that we're going to see in a minute.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it does tie in, though, with some of the comments we've been hearing from some of the analysts, you know, particularly, well, Gartner and Forrester analysts. You know, I've heard both of them comment that they've seen companies rush into implementing a DLP solution and trying to bring it up quickly without first taking the time to, you know, scan, discover, and classify their data, and really, you know, effectively putting this data in motion solution on top of a mass of unsorted data, and that has led to a lot of failure in DLP.
That's an excellent point, Joe. I believe it was Anton Chavakin who wrote about that in a piece not too long ago, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. And I know Forrester has also commented on this. I cannot remember who it was, though, Gabe.
It's likely Heidi Shea.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to switch to talking a bit about the price of a breach. And, you know, typically when companies are breached, it's the data that people are after. And the price of the breach or the cost of the breach is really in the value of data. In the Sony breach, Spirion was subpoenaed as part of the Sony breach. We found that there were 601 files, PDFs, Word documents, Excel sheets, that contained a massive 1.1 million social security numbers. What was interesting was less than 1% of these numbers were unique. There was just massive sensitive data sprawl. Now, most people remember that Sylvester Stallone's social security number was stolen, and also the Australian actress Rebel Wilson and some other celebrities. But not so too were many others, including the CEO of Sony. His social security number was replicated 93 times. Now, nobody needs 93 copies of somebody's social security number. So one of the big things here is when you have sensitive data sprawl, it can lead to sensitive data leaks. And by having this amount of unprotected sensitive data sitting there on the network, it makes you as an organization wide open to this exposure in the event of a breach.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but it's absolutely consistent, Joe, with what you mentioned about Sony. And you know, and what we're starting to see is a lot of organizations have small amounts of high-value data that could unfortunately replicate itself, you know, many hundreds of times, and it's to the surprise of many that one document or file can become like, you know, thousands of documents and files throughout the organization. So the ability to get your arms around this problem is really important for almost every organization. But it's daunting. It's very challenging, and maybe it's impossible without the right tools. Now, what we do here in our survey is we use an extrapolated cost methodology, which has been used in other studies, and it's an okay way of collecting data, but it's not as reliable as doing actually field-based research, like when we do our cost of data breach, which is an annual study that we publish with IBM. But these numbers are numbers that we were calculated, and if you get a copy of the paper, we want you to see the methodology, and if you have any questions, again, we would love to hear from you. But what we did is we broke the costs into different categories. The first category is the cleanup or remediation costs of a data breach, and if you just eyeball, I'm not going to go through each number, you'll see that Spirion is lower than the non-DLP user group, and DLP is kind of in the middle, a DLP user group. The next category is lost user productivity. Again, we get that same pattern. The third category is disruption to normal operations. Here we see that Spirion is much, much lower than the DLP user and non-DLP user group. The next category is damage to or theft of IT assets and infrastructure. Again, that you get that same pattern. And finally, probably the costly in our experience in doing these studies is the reputation impact and marketplace image, the damage to marketplace image that could result. And here again, the Spirion numbers are much lower. If you kind of added up the totals are almost 2x between the non-DLP user group and the Spirion group. So we think these numbers are very, very interesting. I know, Gabe, you have some color commentary to add. So I'd love to hear it.
I do indeed. I'll tell you what struck me most interesting about this, Larry. As I look at the numbers, both individually and as a whole, the delta, that is the difference between the DLP users and the non-DLP users, were surprisingly and alarmingly not terribly far off from each other, almost suggesting that those with paid-for solutions, such as the ones in the study, were performing about as well as those that were doing things manually and ad hoc. It really was kind of a surprise in the loss categories to see that extrapolated out.
Well, great comment. We've noted that too, and we're trying to figure that out. It doesn't mean that your competitors in the DLP space are not providing users with what they need. I think there's definitely some of that. Even if they're a user of DLP, they might not be a happy user, or believe that their organizations are effectively using the tool.
Indeed.
There's a whole, I think, other story behind these numbers. It's pretty interesting.
We might have to do a follow-up. We might have to do a follow-up study to figure out exactly what's going on there. I certainly would expect that for my money, I would be further ahead than those who were just simply doing nothing or doing things manually.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so back to visibility and control. And really what we're looking at here is within Spyglass. Spyglass gives you the ability to really get a view of your sensitive data or your security posture around sensitive data at any given point in time. The elements here are designed to really allow you to go back in time and see how things were, or to monitor where you are at on a particular day. Over on the right side, we didn't talk about the sensitive data heat map and or the bubbles, as they're commonly known. But what this heat map is showing you is it can show you your sensitive data footprint by a number of different areas. So it could, for instance, one of the areas it will show you is by location. So you might look at this and you might see, well, the HR department is bright red, but that's probably fair enough. And here I've got some intellectual property data in New Jersey, which is fine, but I shouldn't have any IP in Germany, and there is some. And this then allows you to drill down further, and then you see exactly what sensitive data is located at those locations. You can also do it by person, by personnel. So this allows you to see within your organization if certain people are holding sensitive data elements that they shouldn't be. So it really does give you great visibility into your sensitive data throughout your organization, both structurally where it is in the organization, on the network, in the cloud, where you have it, and also by personnel who's holding on to that data. And one final thought here. This is a story from one of our users who presented at our user group meeting late last year. And this customer was one of those customers that when they first started using the technology, they found 35 million pieces of sensitive data. It was a very big find. The story they told, which I thought was charming, but also a very good reminder that we're dealing with people, and people who are just trying to do their jobs. They, when they found out after the first scan they had 35 million pieces of sensitive data, they immediately went to work about how to corral that sensitive data, how to protect it, delete what was not necessary, and bring things under control. And then they set some policies in place on an ongoing basis so they could make sure that it didn't get out of control again. One of the policies was they asked people to, on a routine basis, I think it was once a month, delete sensitive data that they were not using or data that they didn't need. So to make a conscious effort to go ahead and delete it. When they did the next scan, they found out that sensitive data had moved. And what had happened was people had deleted it, but they hadn't emptied the recycle bin, and they were finding a large amount of sensitive data stored in the recycle bins. So they changed the policy, and they asked people to delete the sensitive data and then to go and make sure that they emptied the recycle bins. What they quickly found happening was that there was a lot of sensitive data that was not being deleted. And when they were faced with given a two-step approach, people did nothing. So they didn't get round to deleting anymore because they had to delete them and remember to empty the recycle bin. So the group running this then said, okay, we're going to go back to delete. And now what they do is go back, have everybody delete it, and they use Spirion to automatically clear the recycle bins. So I think this was just an interesting example of trying to apply a technology and apply rules to people who really are just out there trying to do their jobs and trying to do their jobs as efficiently as possible.
Well, that does bring us to the end of the main portion of today's session. If there are any questions, by all means, please feel free to ask. As Larry mentioned at the top of the webinar, he absolutely enjoys getting additional questions and feedback and so forth. We'll be here for a bit taking any questions. You can also reach us via email. I'd love to thank our special guest today, Dr. Larry Ponemon. Thank you so much for joining, and Dr. Joe Weber.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude today's presentation. Thanks again.